Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World Live. I'm your host, Jessica, and this week we have the team behind ChangedStars here joining us. We have Leland and Patrice. Thanks so much for coming on, folks.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having us, Jess.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on, and we'll be talking more about ChangedStars, talking about the game. If you are watching live, hello. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat and join in, and we'll answer them live. If you're listening to the podcast, thanks very much for listening, and anything we talk about will be linked in the show notes, so you can click through there. So, before we get into talking about ChangedStars, I would love to get to know you two a little bit better, your history with games and why you decided to start making games and that sort of journey. So, the question I always start with is, do you remember the first game that you played? So, who wants to go first about that?
Pat,
I don't mind going first.
Oh, you are coming through. Never mind.
Yes. Sorry. I was trying to... I was watching the YouTube at the same time, and I caught the splashback, so I didn't want to say anything initially.
Oh, yeah.
So, you're gonna hate my answer to this. My very first game was D&D.
No. It's for a lot of people.
Yeah. But, so my first experience with tabletop was I was a little kid who desperately loved books and wanted to live in Borders books if I could. And I spent as much time there as I possibly could. And over the course of my perusing the many aisles of the shelves in Borders, I stumbled across the role-playing game section. And I was so excited by all the beautiful art and the expansive worlds and the way that you could engage with them as opposed to just reading about them. You could actually bring them to life. And I was a bit of a lone little kid at the time, so I didn't really have that much of a friend circle with whom to play. But I immersed myself in the books, and I got really into the especially D&D, but a couple others, Shadowrun and the Cthulhu mythos, and basically anything with a cool cover. And I got so immersed in them. I read the Drizzt series front to back, and then I finally found a group who was willing to play a D&D with me. I'd read mostly 3.5 at the time, and finally found somebody who was willing to play a D&D, and my character died the first session.
Oh no. What a big build-up as well. This time reading, and then you get into the game and it's like instantly death. Oh no.
Right. I was so sad. My poor little gnome fell into a lava pit.
Oh no. Oh no. Leland, was it that traumatic for you, your first game? What was your first game you played?
So I for various reasons did not okay. Strictly speaking, the first game we tried to play was Fate. I'm in college. I finally have friends who are willing to try a tabletop role-playing game. We go to the game store. I see Numenera on the shelf. I am instantly in love. And the game store people go, actually, if you're first timers, you'd really try this game Fate instead, which is perhaps one of the worst pieces of RPG advice anyone has ever given. Like, I know lots of people who enjoy and play Fate. None of them agree with the idea it's a starter game, particularly for the person running it. My God. So it collapses on impact, doesn't really happen. 1 year later, I've transferred to another school, and I have also found a book that we had at my house, which is Space 1889, which I have around here somewhere. And I've read it, but I find a 3.5 game. I play in it. It's fine. I learn the general gist. I don't really dig it. I run some Vampire the Masquerade. I like that system a lot more from certain perspectives, but I'm a very new DM. I don't understand how Obfuscate isn't just functionally God mode, because, yeah, they're invisible, yada, yada. Like, there's certain nuances and vagaries that I'm not picking up. My first proper campaign is Space 1889. We really like it, but the combat system, like, for those uninitiated, this is like one step removed from a war game, and it did not come from the D&D tradition. So it was like, you have a 1 through 6 stat, roll the dice, try and get out of, that sort of a thing. And the combat rules were literally like, take late 1800s war game and put it on Mars and add Martians, and you just treat your character as a model, basically. So over winter break, I strip out the entire back end of the combat system and create it such that it plugs perfectly into all existing gear. So like I don't invent new stats for any item, and the gear list still works, but I've totally changed how it plays. And that's perhaps the first time I really designed and got to play my own tabletop role-playing game in a sense. And after that, I mean, yeah, I think Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Second Edition is probably where I would continue to cut my teeth a lot until I eventually make my first game, the Echo Diesel Age RPG, which is a D100 in a similar vein. And yeah, I mean, I've been designing games since forever, but as a stupid child, I couldn't figure out things like how to decide what order events occurred in because initiative was apparently too complicated. And if I ever got a book, like it wasn't even D&D, but it was some very similar game, right? And it said something along the lines of like armor class. And the description of armor class was so confounding to me, I couldn't continue reading the book because I had literally less an idea of what the fuck I was reading than when I started reading the definition of armor class. Again, maybe I was a thick kid, but like, this is part of why I always like, I am militant on you will explain what a role-playing game is and you will go in with like a very clean explanation of what the book is at the top, because this could be someone's first game, and I personally hold out for that. I hold out for ChangedStars being someone's first role-playing game and introducing them. Goes back to my interest with how Vampire the Masquerade fits into the hobby and how it was able to explode because, yes, it was literally able to draw in people who had no D&D experience or desire to obtain D&D experience. And I think people, there's so much that could be said about that I won't eat up all the airtime, but
no, fair enough, because we do want to get talking about ChangedStars. I mean, you did mention, I mean, people in the comments have joined your thoughts in starting with Fate. Obviously, Fate's a great fun game, love that, but maybe not the best game to play as your first ever game. Obviously, you mentioned ChangedStars could potentially be that for somebody, but what do you think makes a game a good first entry game? Like, what elements do those role-playing games have that make it more accessible for people?
It's going to vary a little, so bear in mind I'm making a very generalized answer. And there's groups who I'm sure Fate was the right entry who would have thrown D&D in the trash and vice versa. But how much you expect of the game runner, and if the game runner is even like a role that exists, is pretty vital. If you're all playing a game, like if you were handed a book that is functionally like a choose your own adventure with die rolls and checks, but the group can play it like headless, in a sense, that's a much easier in because no one is taking on an additional burden inherently and nobody is having to create it. Now, lots of people like myself, the fun is that I'm making up the scenarios and throwing stuff at them. So that doesn't keep me back. But really, I think it's knowledge transmission. Whatever niche you're going for, whatever the players are into, you need to assume they have no idea what a test or a check or an attack roll or a save or whatever design tradition you're coming from is. And you got to really like spell it out. Like you got to define, I mean, I have them somewhere around here. Like the idea of like, what's a D10? That is an incredibly strange piece of jargon to every human being in the world who does not play these games. Even people who make and use dice for other purposes do not use this jargon. D, die size, you know what I mean? And the fact that it's like you put the number of dice rolled in front of it. I remember there was some like, I don't know if it was like White Dwarf or like a dice set that was around because I did have Warhammer minis, although I never even came close to playing the game. I had friends who did, but I never got into it. The one of those booklets, like a Chessex dice or something, had an explanation of like, here's what a detail, like that's how I learned what they were. You rarely see that explained in game books. It's like you're gonna roll a number of D6. All right, buddy. We have written a game for someone who already knows these games now because we have not. Before first, and I'm not saying I'm perfect about this, by the way. You can read ChangedStars and find moments where you could be like, hey, did you really introduce a concept before you'd fully defined it? And like, yeah, fair dues, in part because we, as with many indie games, dealt with this is actually related, the create your character, gear, rules triangle. We went with CareGen first because so many people are going to gun right there. But even that was a decision informed by what sort of players we thought we were going to have. So I suppose I've given a really complicated non-answer, but my short answer is hard definition in not necessarily natural language, but language that you could hand a random office functionary who has no interest in playing your game, right? And give the task of like create a character and make a strength check. And this office functionary would just sit down, read through it, and do it with no additional resources whatsoever, and also they don't particularly like their job or your game, but they're still going to do it. Actually, I harken back to a certain D&D game I was in. I know,
Oh, yeah.
heresy. But the important thing is he was running some thing that WotC had put out. It was all right. But the important thing is this. Nobody in this group wanted to DM. I was like at the periphery, and everyone wanted the experience of playing a role-playing game every weekend. And he made it happen. He wasn't particularly into making stuff. We couldn't go far off the beaten track. The role-playing, like when I tried to like meet NPCs and do things, I'll say it left something to be desired. But for a really important, like, he made it happen with the material he was given. As long as he was given material, he could make it functionally happen. I think about that guy constantly when I'm writing modules. You need to write that somebody, like, because at the end of the day, I do not need or want your module. I'm a role-playing game designer. I want to make my own worlds. I want to make my own stories. I want to make my own adventures.
Sure.
I get little to nothing out of modules. But there is someone for whom the game night does not happen without the module. And I write for that person. Pat, by the way, I see you talking, but I don't hear anything.
Oh, I was just mouthing, I really like modules. I like
No, I'm not a module hater. I get there's lots of cool stuff. I enjoy reading them, but you see what I'm saying, which is that write to somebody like you're an RPG designer. You are at the hard edge periphery. There's even some people like Matt Colville who will say, I think all DMs really are designers on some level. This is a delusion. We are imagining that our people who are playing our game are much more similar to ourselves than they necessarily are. You want to write so the outmost edge of the sphere of potential interest can play and enjoy your game and get on board with your game and assume that they're not going to devote their lives to reading your book. It needs to be fun, have pictures, generally get the point across and get you there. I'm not saying we did a perfect job, although hats off Casey Chen, they did an amazing job of the layout. Pat, of course, who originated the universe and did the art, like does a great job drawing you with the visuals. And however well I did writing and defining it, you really gotta make it so that someone who's like, yeah, I'll run this game, and that's their level of enthusiasm, can run your game. Because like you really have to shoot for that, because the people who love your game, people who are going to take off and run through worlds, who are going to create their own custom setting for it, who are going to do all X, Y, and Z, they don't necessarily need the boost, although sometimes they do. Sometimes, like in my case, ChangedStars doesn't have a glossary, in part because it has a lot of hyperlinks and bookmarks in the PDF that, like, to some idea fixes that problem. But there have been people who didn't find a particular rule for fun fact, go to hazards, and this is where it is. But like, they didn't understand how to make people burn or how fire worked, like in the middle of a session. And because it was a little harder, it kind of drug out that session for them.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a killing blow for them. They were already invested in the campaign. But like, if there's something basic you want to put in an adventure or have happen spontaneously, and it's difficult, particularly when the game doesn't do a great job of conveying, here's what there's rules for, here's what there's not. Like a game like, my friends are referred to as director mode, but a director mode game like Fate, where you can pretty much intuit that, like, here are the broad rules and it's your discretion is where you're going to allow, call for, deploy X, Y, Z, is almost more freeing than a game that's more particular, like a Pathfinder, or to an extent a ChangedStars. I think we straddle the middle, where it's like, I don't know if the game has fall damage rules. I don't know if the game has specific rules for fire. And I'm someone who would like to get that from the game because I'm not a designer and I don't want to impromptu it. And I don't have a guide stone that tells me you will impromptu many types of damage. Here is your guide stone. Fabula Ultima, for example, minor, like standard, major, and huge damage, I believe, across the levels. Emma's a great game designer. She's done an amazing job laying that all out for you. But you've gotten a nice possibility space, and you're not thinking, are there specific rules for what happens if I contract hypothermia? I mean, if you're playing Delta Green, maybe, especially in a module. But if you're playing Fabula Ultima, no, you can get the idea that it's going to be a minor frost damage. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about different games, and you started talking a bit about ChangedStars in kind of answering the question about whether or not it would be good for people that are new and your design approach in that. So let's just dig in and start talking about ChangedStars a little bit. So Pat, I'm going to tag you in here if you want to introduce what ChangedStars is and your role in creating it.
Sure, absolutely. So I think you can probably tell from our initial spiels that I'm the illustrator, and you know, I like the lore and stuff, and Lee's really the design head and the person who did most of the writing. So I like to consider myself the concept creator of ChangedStars, though it has from the get-go been a collaborative experience with the group that we were building it around initially. And essentially, it started as so I love sci-fi. I love alien cultures and sci-fi concepts. I love how a good sci-fi can explore the world in which we live and
Yeah.
kind of expose various biases or hypocrisies or
Hmm.
project into the future what current trends might lead to. I find that fascinating. I'm a huge fan of especially speculative science fiction, but also sci-fi, which has which explores various concepts that I'm partial to, like
Yeah.
gender, politics, and the various derivations thereof. So when I went to make ChangedStars, I wanted to create a sci-fi world for my player group to engage with. And initially, I was going to run Alien RPG for them, which is a great game by Free League,
Yeah.
which I love the Alien franchise. It's absolutely one of my favorites.
Hmm.
And you'll probably see a little bit of the artistic inspiration from Geiger in some of the art, as well as the clunky spaceships that were so prevalent in the 1980s industrial design
Hmm.
uh, frame. And um, basically, I pitched the group a couple of concepts to create the world, and we made it. It kind of evolved after that.
Yeah.
And so the core concept of Change Stars is in the far-flung future, humanity forms an evil fascist junta, which, hard to imagine humans could do that, right? And
Yeah.
they go about conquering human settlers on alien worlds first, and then once they've united humanity under one banner, they call themselves the human empire, and then they spread like a cancer to the rest of the stars. And it's a horrible organization that commits various atrocities across the stars until they run into a species called the Mirai, who are those the character that's pointing in the background. That's a Mirai, member of the Mirai
Kind of
species.
insectoid looking a bit.
Yeah, very insectoid looking. I as much as I intended for Change Stars to be an aversion to old sci-fi tropes that I think we can move beyond because I grew up. Uh, I'll get on that later. But as much as I wanted it to be a bit of an aversion, I also wanted to show some of the tried and true concepts that people really enjoy from science fiction. And
Hmm.
I love insectoid species. I love the
Yeah.
I love. I was a biologist in school,
Hmm.
and I just couldn't learn enough about insects and hive or hive
Yeah.
behavior, eusocial insects, and the hive structures. Actually, very different from how people conceive of them. Usually, the hive mind concept is very inaccurate. But I digress again. Um, anyway,
But yeah, Change
I
Stars. We
yes.
had this human empire, and then we had this insectoid race come appear on the scene, and then
Mm. And so the human empire thought they could squash them like bugs, and turns out the Morai had allies, and the rest is history. The human empire fell to the combination of these allied forces and independent rebellions within the empire, because lo and behold, fascist empires tend to collapse because that sort of control is unnatural and screwed up, and people don't like being forced to behave certain ways.
Yeah, let's look
And
at Star Wars,
so
eh?
yeah, well, it's got a little bit of Star Wars, a little bit of Star Trek,
Mhm.
and a whole lot of, in the gameplay itself, Alien.
Yeah, I would say with the
Ultimately, this is the backdrop for a world in which, the war's over. It's been 100 years,
Mhm.
and people are living in the post-war environment.
Mhm.
And the core conceit of gameplay in ChangedStars is getting, surviving space, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things to, survive, to help their people out, and to make their way in the galaxy.
yeah, it's the post-revolution, how do you win the peace scenario is the broad backdrop for all of these
Hmm.
stories that
Mhm.
transpire.
Yeah, I think one of the big themes that set out, and you have this a lot when you talk about the game, is it's quite a hopeful setting. It's not like, because you mentioned Alien as reference, like, which is not a hopeful setting. It's dark,
Nope.
gritty horror, and you're all going to die terribly. But this game, I think, feels like it's striving for something good. It is reaching out for a hopeful world, which is a really nice sci-fi setting to create. One of the things I really liked as well is that you said a lot of the inspirations by different queer and feminist literature and things like that. Could you speak a little bit about those kind of references and inspirations for the game?
I would say one of Pat's
Yeah.
big ones is ancillary justice, and one of mine is Left Hand of Darkness, but I'll let Pat go first.
Yeah.
Well, one of mine is also Left Hand of Darkness. I'm a huge Ursula K. Le Guin fan. But I grew up reading a lot of sci-fi. My mom's a huge sci-fi head, and
Mhm.
I was immersed in it growing up. And a lot of the sci-fi I was reading, like Heinlein and Orson Scott Card, was
Mhm.
not. Uh, there were a lot of problems that I saw even at a young
Sure.
age in how they saw the world, and I wanted to get a more diverse perspective on sci-fi worlds. And so when I was basically it's been a on and off project of my life to just find interesting sci-fi settings, and interesting sci-fi authors, and learn what they have
Yeah.
to say. And so I found the feminist sci-fi movement of the second wave feminism to be very interesting. I think there's a lot of problems in a lot of a lot of the literature there too, but
Sure.
it's from a different perspective, which is drastically different from the Heinleinian, you know, American bootstraps, and men, uber alles, and maybe a little bit of space fascism is good, actually, kind of concepts. It really, second wave feminist sci-fi literature just eats into that, and critiques it, and sometimes goes in weird directions that I don't necessarily agree with either. But there are definitely some people whose work remains just golden to this day, and Ursula K. Le Guin is chief amongst them. And
Mhm.
then you've got amazing. Everybody knows Margaret Atwood, of course.
Mhm.
But the ways that feminist authors try to invert existing sci-fi tropes, and explore implications thereof. That's the kind of tradition I'd like to posit ChangedStars belongs to, because in
Mhm.
many ways it is my attempt to our attempt to counter, act as a more optimistic
Mhm.
counterexample to settings like Alien,
Yeah.
and to settings like even Star Wars,
Yeah.
where the Empire's always winning, and always, you know, um, at your back. And it even, I even wanted to go a step further, and everybody's favorite, utopian sci-fi is Star Trek, but even there you see the trappings of empire, and
Mhm.
the human led Federation being the primary
Mhm.
good guys of the galaxy, and I just feel like that's a little naive, frankly,
Sure.
and kind of lets people off the hook for a little bit of the some of the implications there.
Yeah.
So one thing that I wanted to do was make sure that I created a setting that critiqued imperialism and humanocentricity
Mhm.
um, in ways that weren't like that were actually like fun to engage with,
Yeah.
because I also want people to be able to enjoy themselves, immerse themselves in the world, and feel like this is in fact a positive outcome for humanity if you can get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
The
Fabulous.
Trinity
No,
is not the bad guy. There
abs-
this is a setting where there's actually a safe port of call if you can get there.
absolutely. I mean, speaking about immersing ourselves in the world, the one thing being about role-playing games, like you mentioned, is these are stories that we can put ourselves into and walk around in the world. So let's talk a little bit about the characters we would be playing. So if I was to sit down and play a game, Leland, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about the different characters that there are in the game and how we
Certainly.
would make a character.
So, ChangedStars has has an ideological position that you are a normal person, and
Mhm.
that means that every member of a species has a health stat, which is to say that humans have 4 health. Period. You don't adjust that because of what human you are. You have stamina, which is a soft health pool atop that, which is scales off of your stats and has a boost based on your species. But there is a sense that a human being is probably going to die in about the same number of bullets from a revolver as generally happens. It
Mhm.
is after that, but your skills and stuff aren't set or capped by your species, with the
Okay.
exception of synths, because these synthetic characters, particularly those, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The broad point is you'll choose a species where you get stuff like how fast you move, what your health situation is looking like, and
Mhm.
neat details like the Rast. Little otter
Mhm.
looking people can hold their breath for up to 15 minutes. The
Mhm.
Mirai communicate pheromonally with each other. So we can't understand sniffs yet. It's changing. But outside the anxiety pheromone, there is nothing really that humans are getting to it or other species are getting to it. So they have to have a translator. So you can imagine you play a Mariah character, your translator box breaks, you're in some place without easy replacement of the
Mhm.
technology. All of a sudden, now you're playing charades. So there's all these little
Yeah.
details about the character that doesn't change any of your stats. You know what I mean? It doesn't make you better or worse at a skill roll, but it does inform who you are in your situation and give you some
Yeah.
cool stuff. Like the news guy have a natural attack and natural armor.
Mhm.
So after that you choose your archetype, except really you make your character however you want. It is a
Mhm.
classless game wearing a class system trench coat. There's 12
Mhm.
archetypes. They're easy. I want to play a pilot. I want to play a hacker. I want to play a marine. I want to play
Yeah.
an engineer. You just pick it up and you go. It gives you a lot of guidance. But when you look a little bit deeper, there's really an ABC schema for how the classes work. And as long as you do nothing but a one-to-one substitution,
Mhm.
you're fine. Like if you don't like the edge break, you take a different edge break. If you want a different set of focus skills or a different set of tag stats, you just change them out. The only thing but it's like, do you get two tag stats, 4 focus skills, or 2 starting talents? That's the difference, the
Mhm.
ABC. As long as
Okay.
you, and everyone gets one edge break no matter what. As long as you keep to that, you can do what you like. So we built a pretty wide arena. If you want to be a scientist, an investigator, a mechanic, a marine, a melee combatant marauder, and just all sorts of things. At a pre-gen, I recently made a custom archetype that's layabout artiste. You can really, gunslinger. You can really take this and do whatever you want with it. And there's a wide spread of talents that allow you to build and niche into certain things. For example, you can take talents that are related to helping your friends, your allies cope with psychological trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms rather than the initial negative
Mhm.
coping mechanisms you begin with when you first suffer them. There are people who can literally take the edge you're accruing, which is like anxiety or stress from a game like Alien RPG. I would say that's the strongest influence they had on us is we have our edge system. It has distinctions, but it is a push your luck parallel die pool, which will start to sound familiar to people who played that game. and
Mhm.
there's ways of integrating it and mitigating it that pair up well. So you can be playing a character who's helping give action economy, who's helping people overcome their issues, who just like, I'm really good at hitting people in melee. I'm really good at shooting people who are far away. I can reload my gun faster.
Mhm.
I have a science degree, and I've decided it's xenoarchaeology, so I get a bonus wherever xenoarchaeology applies. There
Got it.
is, in my mind, enough latitude that anybody who's doing like a space job or existing like out in our universe somewhere can be mechanically represented.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna start with like, yeah, who are you? What's your thing? Are you a synth built forever ago who did this and now you've been jailbroken after the Empire period and you're just still doing it, or you chose something wildly different that maybe juxtaposed in an interesting way? Are you just a person who signed up and is now out of the Trinity military and now you're just hanging around and an adventure happens? Are you like a criminal at the edge of the law and you've developed these skill set, these like you lie, you're like a scam artist or something, so you have through your teeth, which is the talent that helps you lie. You have silver tongue, which is the edge break that helps you get through things. I will mention briefly, because I've alluded to this, our edge system builds up to a plateau and you can trigger something called an edge break. Usually you're going
Mhm.
to suffer a tier 3 shock and develop a negative cope out of this, but the benefit is you don't roll any dice. You just get like an automatic maximum hit on what you would be doing. And there's all
Okay.
sorts of ways these manifest. Ace lets you do 3 spaceship maneuvers at once in like space stuff. Blur is like nobody can op you. You can move really fast. All these other things happen. You are already dead. Automatic full hit on a melee attack. Deadeye, same thing for ranged attack. It's your marquee moment. You build your character. There's Eureka, which is you get all these insights and you start helping people a whole bunch. There's It Just Works, where you force things to happen really fast mechanically and like keep machines working and do all these wonderful things. So you build around your basic ability, your additional capacity from talents,
Yeah.
and your marquee moment, if you will, where if you've really built up to it and you're willing to suffer the consequences, you can just make something happen. You're no longer a victim of chance, so to speak.
Right. So, well, it sounds like you've got plenty of guidance for people to kind of jump in and pick something. Like you say, you've got a whole range of different species that people can be. You have the archetypes that people can pick, but it's enough of a toolkit system that actually you could build your own using those steps, and it's not going to be unbalanced or,
Yeah.
or make the game bad.
I was
Fantastic.
even the species. I mean, I was just
Mhm.
on Make a Cat RPG, and we had to make a literal cat. So I had to invent a new species because literal cat isn't one of them. There's
Mhm.
7, 8 if you want to be cheeky and count the variant synth, because the full
Mhm.
synth doesn't actually use the edge system. They use programming for something different. But if you want to still get that core experience everyone else is getting as a synth, you play the variant. It was more, humanoid modeled mind.
Sure.
And yeah, like you can just look at it and extrapolate. But the archetypes are literally just like, there's a custom class system. I made 12 that all fit within the custom class rules.
Mhm.
Pick one and adjust it or make your own. Once you know it, like our ideal was that once you knew it, it would be like a sub 10-minute job to make a character.
Oh, fab.
And
Great.
I mean, we've seen people who play a lot of it and who already knew what the talents were, so they didn't have to go check. Um,
Mhm.
Literally a sub 60-second job. Like
Wow.
once you really know what it is, I would say the most time you're spending is sprinkling stat and skill points, and you don't get that many, which
Mhm.
can make the decision a little bit harder in and of itself. But once you really know what your pattern is, yeah, you can rip them right out. So I would
Fab.
say that it will take a bit more than that your first go, but
Sure.
I really tried to build it so that you can build all sorts of things. Also, talents work in a tiered system where there's a first tier and a second tier. I call them
Oh, like a
skill
tree
talent.
sort of thing.
They're talent trees, but really they're more of a
Mhm.
talent bush. I like to joke because the way it works is okay. Do you have anything from tier 1 of this talent tree? Congratulations, you can now get anything from tier 2. There's
Okay,
not
great.
further tiers and there's not tight dependencies. So broadly speaking, you can get out what you want, and because you can begin your build with double talents, because that's like the C form of a character, there's no talent that you cannot begin the game with. Strictly
Fantastic.
speaking, if you want to make a one-shot character with no extra XP and you just want to, you're like, I really want a tier 2 talent, picking one totally at random here. I need polycarb abs. It gives me natural armor equivalent to my resilience. I'm a really tough cookie. I'm really going to take a beating. Or I really want
Me at the gym.
without a trace,
Oh God,
without a trace really helps you not get detected while you're hacking because of stuff it gives you. You're like, I really need my character ID or assassin. You can guess what that's good for, right? You can begin the game with any of those talents I just listed, right?
Yeah.
The one thing you can't do is begin with multiple tier 2s, but like, I can't give you the world. I do want this to be a good game for mid-form to even long-form campaign play, which is something that games that squish down the mechanical universe and like give you a lot from the start sometimes suffer from. It's really only good for a one shot or a couple essentially adventure, and then you just start over or like limit yourself. And I hope and believe that alongside how we've built this and the rules that we give you for drip feed and XP based on intended campaign length, you will be able to really get a lot out of this and begin to grow into other areas that feel organically logical and build up a character concept without, at some point in the game with too few options, you start to buy things that aren't even logical for your character, or you voluntarily stop buying stuff, which...
We just had a question about advancement. So how does advancement work in the game? Like relation with XP, or
it's XP by advancement. There aren't levels. When you start at a higher quote unquote level, what you do is jumpstart, we call it, and you say jumpstart 5, jumpstart 10, jumpstart 15 experience. The reason I hand it out in increments is because a talent buy is 5 XP, but in fact, for 3 XP, you can buy additional skill point. No, it does not scale higher at later skill costs. In part because there used to be the way it worked, and it was universally agreed upon that what the system got out of it was literally too little for how hard it was to teach, even in a very stripped down basic way.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a pure XP by advancement system. There are not levels. Enemies have tiers. Tier 0, 1 hit point. That's for beasts and little machines, right? Tier 1, they're a humanoid or a more beefed up beast or sim rather. Sims aren't full FAI, as we call them. They're simulated personalities, like a large language model, almost like something you'd call AI today, even though it isn't, versus Fae, the full AI, which is what synths are. And tier 2, who are, I think, anybody who's played a game with a discrete action economy doled out per character, e.g. most character role-playing games, knows that there's a simple rule that if you get too many players and the bad guy moves once, they're about to get beat down by action economy. Tier 2 get to move twice, and they get other extrusions on the action economy, like they can frequently do something pretty significant as a side action when most people have to main action attack. So yeah, so there's that tier system for enemies. It doesn't go better than tier 2 plus, although I do leave with the plus room open. So, and yeah, in accordance with ordinary people doing extraordinary things in space, like there is not inherent HP growth. There's 2 talents under the soldier tree, one that increases your stamina by 2, one that increases your health by 2. That's it. Total career growth of hit points for a character possible is 4. So this is not a game where you start with 5 XP and 5 HP and you end the campaign with 105 HP. A bullet from a revolver remains functionally as dangerous to killing you as it did from the beginning. Now there's gear progression. But not all characters are going to wind up walking around in a CCU, which is our version of a small mech, or armor. You know what I mean? Like really heavy armor. And you might go to a fancy dinner where that's not necessarily appropriate, where you want to wear your ballistic weave maybe, which looks like clothing but does have armor, yada, yada. But the idea there is that kind of like a traveler, and I would say this is where we bump up against a lot of the sci-fi greats, is there is a certain degree of like, do you have the gear? Do you have the cyberware? There's also cyberware. And like, you're going to grow more skills and you're going to be able to do more. You're going to be able to get talents that really change what you can do in the experience, but you're not going to metamorphosize into a god because you learned a lot of things. You're not going to take a full chest of like plasma because, oh, well, I've really been at this a while. Like you have a discrete amount of muscle, blood, and cartilage in the shoulder. It's going to fluctuate a little, but
yeah. Well, it's a hard sci-fi setting, as you mentioned. So things like that, it's going to be there's realisms of if you get shot or hit by something, no matter how cool and strong you are, it hurts and it has an impact.
No spoilers, but I suspect no matter how deep you get into the campaign, or you get into the expanse, a frag grenade going off next to your head is probably equally deadly. You know what I mean?
I mean, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Okay, so we've so we've kind of gone through kind of the setting and the world. We've talked a little bit about who we're going to be playing, what we do, and you've hinted to some cool gear as well. So I'm sure the book is littered with very cool gear and stuff you can do because it's sci-fi and that gives you the fun to do that. But we haven't actually talked about the core resolution mechanics of the game. So
Absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about what that is.
So it is a D6 die pool system. And
Mhm.
I was telling Pat, like, I want to make it modulate up and down, which I do sometimes. And she was like,
Mhm.
Leland, it must be a 6 to succeed.
Mhm.
And this is one of the few times when we talked about mechanics early on. And I think it was a good choice. And what it means is that it is very easily and immediately readable, understandable. You're not doing extra math. You know the sixes that hit, anything else isn't, although we'll get around to ones. And what it is you add your stat, you add your skill. They're always married. Earlier on, you could pair them differently, but no. Like resilience governs melee. If you get the thing that lets you use maneuver for melee instead, because you're like a dexterous fighter, the war dancer talent, you're rolling
Mhm.
maneuver, and that's always alacrity. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so there are these like marriages of stats and skills, and the way you roll them is you always roll that many dice, that many d6.
Yeah.
Everybody starts at a default of 2 in every stat, so that's your minimum starter, even if you never put any skill points into it. And skills cap out at like 6. Stats also usually cap out at 6, although SIDS can go higher in those numbers. Shadowrun at maximum 12d6. Anybody who's played Shadowrun right now is probably seeing ghosts because they know you need more than that if you have only 6 to succeed. But we have a default push your luck ability, right? And some talents give bespoke scenarios additional dice. Through your teeth, which I mentioned earlier, is I believe a +3 on communicate tests to lie, for example. By degree gives you a +2 as long as the check is governed, the test is governed by your degree, whatever your advanced degree is. We usually assume it's going to be a scientist who has like xenobiology or something. And you're going to add together the dice and you are going to cast the dice forward and you're going to check for the 6s. And we assume you have no edge right now. You're going to be like, I either didn't get as many successes as I wanted, or I got none at all. And you get to reach. You re-roll every dice that didn't show a 6. So you get to keep your successes if you have them, and you cast it again. You only need 1 6 to succeed unless it's contested, in which case successes are obliterating each other. But every extra one you get is a twist to do it faster or add extra damage or force your enemy. You know, if you get 3, it's a super twist. You can do cool stuff like disarm someone, automatically succeed on this, and then get 1 automatic success on your next roll, do something identical. If you're opening a certain type of airlock, you'll get the same thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And that is sort of the general ebb and flow of play. And when you do that reach, you also gain 1 edge die. And an edge die gives you a 6 for success, but it also gives you 1s. You care about 1s on the edge dice. And if that shows, it generates a shock, level 1, 2, or 3 plus, which you stop counting after there's 3 of them. And that you cannot reach if you rolled a shock. And the different levels have different variably configurable defaults. One of the issues with the game was actually like, how interpretive do we make it? Is it a literal roll table? Do you make it purely interpretive with some guidelines? We have default results, sort of like to know what each one is. And the thing I alluded to earlier is a level 3 plus, like takes you out of the action for the scene until you were a friend. Like you make a resolve check or communicate check, rips you out of it. And so that's fundamentally everything. Piloting a ship, shooting at somebody. I mean, we can talk about like the action economy as a main side action. You can downgrade the main to a side. You have inherent movement, which might be featured in games that we don't say on this the show, but you know what I mean? Like you just have an inherent 6 meters or 5 meters you move every turn, which other metric system enjoyers have lambasted me for. I would like to emphasize it is assuming you're moving around in a space environment, like a tight environment of like a facility or a spaceship. And so some people more familiar with the metric system might be like, these people feel kind of slow. You can, broadly interpret that as a square when you go out into a field or something. And 2 points, Steampunkette. Yes, you will note inside the first cover, we use with permission from In-Case written to Pat directly the likeness of the Pwazi as the springboard for the threatened species. That is correct. If you do not already know what we are talking about, do not look up what we are talking about. And Sean points out, we've got skill bushes, no levels, no HP inflation, and something of a flat character growth. Is this a game where new characters can jump into sessions and not feel too imbalanced? I would say so. Personally, I would give them XP up to the point. But if you wanted to run it that way, if you build a Marine and like you've gone for like rapid reload and some other things that really make sense for your Marine, you have Deadeye. Outside of somebody who's had the skill point max is 4 at Karagen and 6 overall, again for nonsense, you're only going to be 2 dice shy of someone who pumped their first 6 XP into maxing their ballistics. So yeah, I would say you're about as competent and about at not necessarily like you're going to have more skill points spread out across more stuff. You're going to have more cool talent combinations. There's going to be growth, but I would say that if you wanted to run it that way, Sean, absolutely. You could put in a brand new Marine, a brand new scientist, have them be a bit of a greenhorn, maybe give them catch-up XP above everybody else to get them up to everyone else faster. But if you wanted to run it that way, I could absolutely see that path that you could just be like, yeah, this is my fresh character. They don't have the same experience everyone else does, but that doesn't mean that they're a lightweight or a joke. I really tried, and when I thought of stuff like spaceship combat that I'm very proud of, I really tried to game out. There's no way to make a character who feels worthless in that moment. I could be wrong, but I truly feel that whatever the adventure is, there's going to be occasion for your skill set and you're going to have some chances for it to shine. And one of the examples is, for example, piloting. That skill also applies to drones. So, yeah, not every adventure involves flying around a spaceship or driving a car, but you could have a little drone buddy with you. You know what I mean?
Fantastic. Well, I mean, there's so much we could talk about with mechanics, but we are limited by the rules of time as we live and experience time in this planet that we live on. But Pat, before we wrap up, I do want to talk with you about the artwork and the visual design of the game, because you have some beautiful images that if people are watching the live stream can see on screen. So could you talk through your ideas and like kind of what you wanted to do visually with the game?
Yeah, thank you. ChangedStars is kind of what I cut my chops on artistically initially. I'd done a few projects with people before ChangedStars, but prior to this, I was largely doing traditional art, pen and paper, pencil sketches and such. Physical paintings. I hadn't broached digital world yet, and that's actually this is a digital piece that you're looking at right now. There are a mix of physical and digital illustrations in the book, though, because I learned on the job, as it were, how to do digital art. But one thing that I wanted from the get-go was, as I mentioned, growing up, I was looking at all those books in Borders, and but Vampire the Masquerade. I didn't mention it, but Vampire the Masquerade was one that I always really loved. The art of the White Wolf art style was really, really cool to me. And a lot of the art in these books that wasn't Dungeons and Dragons or one of the really.
For reference, I'm pretty sure we have mixed digital, non-digital on the pages right now, and I can't tell. I couldn't tell you off the top which is which.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I could tell you which. Actually, only one of these is traditional. Actually, no. I think 2 of these are traditional.
We got the author herself.
Mariah Walkers.
Yeah, the Mariah.
Definitely. I knew which ones are. No, actually, you're right. I don't know. But anyway, the black and white inked art style that was so prevalent in these books that I grew up reading was something that I thought that's what I should emulate. That's the style that I should aim for, and I'm really glad I did, because as I've found out over the course of making this, it's a pretty I'm pretty decent at it. I've gotten better at it, and it's a very visually appealing art style, especially for these sorts of books. So I'm really, really happy with how I with my choice there. And I also taught myself digital painting for the cover and a lot of the internal chapter headers. All the chapter headers are their own paintings. So just from a logistical standpoint, this was years in the making. You'll see a little bit of art growth. I think if you pay attention, you'll know. So the pictures actually that you're looking at right now, these are all traditional. These are some of my first art pieces that I made for this. And then when you see some portraits that I did later on, they're maybe a little bit nicer to look at, a little bit more more skill present. And that said, as far as designing the world and the way that it looks, I would say a lot of my influence comes from, the sci-fi media that I grew up watching. Alien was a big inspiration for me. So you'll see a little bit of, the Thren, for instance, each species has kind of their own design philosophy. Each species that developed independent space travel has kind of a look to their ships. And I think that comes from me loving Lego when I was growing up, and the various Lego space
Yeah.
factions all had their own distinct looks, and some of them looked like UFOs, and some of them looked like giant bugs in space, and so that design philosophy stuck with me. And I maybe made it a little bit more realistic in mind than the Lego sets tended to be, but
Yeah.
it's there. You can see it. The
Lovely.
Thren, though, have kind of a bioorganic look to their ships, and you can see the Geiger influences there. With the Human Empire ships, you'll see a lot of, I guess, standard sci-fi these days, or like the industrial look that I was talking about earlier that you'll see in Alien, but also a little bit of Flash Gordon, because I really wanted to drive home that their ships are a bit phallic, and that's kind of the point with them. But
Super carrier.
and then I do kind of play around with the hexagonal um architecture for the Mirai, who are this eusocial sapient species who back on their own home planet, they evolved from giant hive complexes, and so you would see how that design philosophy carries forward into the sci-fi modern era. And then you've got the Newsguai, who are hyper individualistic species who fortunately evolved on a planet where a kind of giant coral, which has elements of, being a tree, in that you can make spaceships out, or in that you can make vehicles out of it, but also it's a coral, so it's like a
Okay.
giant, mineral structure as opposed to a carbon-based one. I'm getting into the weeds here, but you can see the different aesthetics and design philosophies of each of the species, and I think that was important that each of them had a bit of a characteristic to them.
Yeah. Lovely. I
Yeah,
love that
and
idea.
I hope that I achieved what I was going for, and it all comes out in the black and white illustrations that you'll see throughout the book.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for talking through that. I mean, it's clear between the two of you the passion and the enthusiasm you have for ChangedStars, and I feel we could sit for another hour and continue talking about it. But we have been here for an hour, so I'm gonna start reining us in. If people do have more questions about the game, though, is there a way that people can get in touch with you and ask more questions or learn more about it?
So we are on both the I say Blue Sky and Twitter are two major domains, trying to move more to the former than the latter for perhaps obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But if on either of those platforms you look up Diesel Shot, hashtag Diesel Shot, you're going to find us. And in the links there, we do have from N-World, that is sort of the Diesel Shot like product catalog, Blue Sky, that links out to Pat and I's stuff and like announces new things. And the Discord, where we have several channels devoted to ChangedStars, and pop anything in there. Feel free to at me, and or just put your questions there, mechanics, lore, everything. I'll be very happy to explain any rule, to show you where something in the book, to handle any typo questions, talk about the lore, talk about the game, advice for running it, like anything and everything ChangedStars, or just generally role-playing games and their design. I'm a big fan. Come hang out. We have a theory crafting channel.
Yeah, hop into our Discord, please. We're expecting a pretty big summer, actually, of releases and fun plans. So if you're interested, slide on in. We're gonna be doing stuff this summer.
Yeah, I mean, well, the actual core game was you crowdfunded successfully, and you fulfilled some backers earlier this year, so it's out and available now for people to pick up a copy. So I've put the link on the screen there, or it's in the show notes. So if you're interested and want to pick up a PDF or a book, there's the link there. But what is the future plans? You kind of previewed it there, Pat. But what's coming next?
Well, I am so glad you asked. So we have a number of ChangedStars modules that are coming out. We just released Hard Passage, which is our first post-book release module that we have up on our site, and we have a lot more planned. Lee, do you want to get into the weeds of exactly what we have coming up?
Yeah.
In
So
addition to ChangedStars, we have a few other things too. But
well,
I
we
think
do have
Lee.
a couple of games. Just to leave on the high note of ChangedStars, we have a back of the book adventure. We have a free module, pay what you want, called The Load, available on both itch and drive through. Pay what you want, so just tip us after if you really liked it. Go ahead and download it, check it out. We have a new paid adventure out called Hard Passage, and it is a module all about like people wake up from cryo, the alarms are blaring, what the hell is going on? It's a scenario module, meaning it has actually been written from multiple perspectives with multiple potential things going on, and you can play the people waking up from cryo with all these like hidden agendas and personalities. You can play the crew of the ship, or you can play, shall we say, people who have less than kind intentions towards the ship. And all of it is there for the Dreamweaver to run however they'd like. I would say it's very strong for repeated play, for splicing to a campaign, for being a campaign starter, for being a one-shot taste tester to see if people dig ChangedStars, and just have your little experience and move on, which I think is how most people relate to indie RPGs. And yeah, we have a pretty strong docket. It's worth noting we didn't get too much into it. There are roughly 5 core frames, things like Science Team, who are doing the Star Trek thing, Marines, who are doing the aliens thing, but you're not working for an evil institution. Things that are like Firefly or Expanse, where you're doing free merchant. Ordinary with normal people. Intrigue, where clandestine, where you're doing like crime or hunting crime
And/or stuff, hypothetically.
We're planning all sorts of modules to support that, and we have leans, like we will have advice on how to run them with any frame or any sort of group. But obviously, when we write like the Sci Team Adventure, that's going to make most sense if you're flying around in a little like the Orchid class spaceship doing the Star Trek thing, but at a harder level of you don't have teleportation. You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot that's going on there. And if you're interested in any sort of a sci-fi story that is, there's not psychic powers and teleporters, but there is like hard decompression and wonderful new species to encounter and big ethical questions and quandaries to encounter and tackle the dangers in the moment, then all that is going to be coming your way. So be looking out. Whatever your preferred hard sci-fi system is, I would almost dare to say you could probably convert to stuff like God, I'm blanking. I would say Traveler at the least. Stars Without Number, to an extent, if you're playing without certain options. So yeah, I would say that you have a lot of options there, and please do feel free to reach out if you have any particular desires or requests. We're always looking at fans and potential new fans' perspective. As we're writing, I see Sean is telling me about OCR, optical character recognition. I must have misunderstood what OCR was, because I thought that was the way that you scanned in old documents, and I'm like, it's been written in the computer originally. Yeah, so I would say the totally F3able. You can F3, you can select, you can copy paste text all throughout the PDF, and in fact, there are purple hyperlinks that will take you directly to a reference, and whenever a page reference comes up, that's also hyperlinked. So anything that you see that's bold in the text is a hyperlink. You'll click it, you'll go right to the page where it is. So it totally has that level of support.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, if anyone has any more questions, the link is in the show notes and has been on the screen for the Discord, so you can get in touch there, and Leland and Pat can let you know the answers there. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about ChangedStars. It's been so great hearing more about it directly from the creators, and your passion and energy and enthusiasm really shines through for the project, so it's really great to see. I do have one more question for you both before you go, which I always ask, which is, do you have any recommendations for any other games. And
Yes.
it can't be a game that you've worked on, and it can't be Dungeons and Dragons. Leland,
Cool.
you sound ready. What is he? What do you
Slightly
got?
complicated, but I've been thinking of this since you said, okay, Conan 2D20. Play that game first. Take what you like about the action options, and then the Dishonored RPG from Modivius 2D20. It is a very pared down version of the system, full of the wonderful lore and ideas from the whale punk world of Dishonored. We did a 3-parter that was brilliant, and what I did was I took those hacked rules, some of which were by our friend Judge Wolf over at TTA when he ran Conan for us. He hacked to do more map centric. You take those rules and options, and then you put them in the world of Dishonored, and wherever a rule isn't there, you rip it from your favorite Modifius 2D20. They also have a Fallout game. Any of those that strike your fancy. They've got a huge catalog. They've got a Star Trek game too. So whatever of those you play, you play another Modifius 2D20 with more rules and action options, and then you play Dishonored. Strong recommend. Two great tastes that taste great together. It's like a meal wine pairing almost. I know, complicated that I'm suggesting you play a different game with the same publisher to play the game, but it's a lovely experience.
I love that. I haven't had a wine pairing for RPG recommendations yet, but I'm glad that we have one now. Pat, I'm going to pass over to you.
I like that idea. Thank you. I can't recommend Alien RPG enough. I'm a huge fan of the franchise. I was thrilled when Free League made the game, and I gotta say, it heavily inspired my decision to make ChangedStars. So definitely give that a look, see if you're at all interested in the Alien franchise. Other than that, God, I play so many. It's like, which one should I recommend? But let's see. Fabula Ultima is something I've been playing lately that I'm really, really enjoying. I love the character options and the general vibes of the game as a fun JRPG simulator, and it's a bit of a rare treat because it's not at all similar to any of the other kind of design philosophies that I've played with in the past. So it's very fun to get into a newish yet familiar system and setting for a game.
Fab. There's some two other great recommendations there. So thank you very much. So thank you again for the recommendations, and thank you for coming on to talk about ChangedStars. And looking forward to seeing all the stuff that you're doing this upcoming year as well that we talked about. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on, and thank you to everyone who's watched and listened. We will be back next week with another episode of Not D&D for you. But for now, I'll say goodbye. That's all for this week. Thank you very much. Bye.